Being one of the longest-lasting empires in world history, the Ottoman Empire was a military, economic and cultural powerhouse for multiple centuries. However, the origins of the mighty empire are shrouded in mystery and traditional folklore. Today on Kings and Generals, we'll be exploring the humble origins of the Ottoman Empire and the peoples and figures that helped with the foundation of a state that would one day span onto 3 continents. In this series, we'll go through early Ottoman history from the days of nomadic Turkic warriors migrating from the steppes of Central Asia to the reign of Mehmed II and his famous Siege of Constantinople in 1453. As with most such stories, it starts off small. Having an edge means having an advantage later, and so here we've got a chance to apply this strategy to something very important: you. Our sponsor Tiege Hanley brings you their simple and affordable skincare products for guys, and they really make improving your appearance and health easy. The best option is to get their Level 1 system, which gets you a daily face wash, a twice-per-week exfoliating scrub, a morning moisturizer that doubles as sunscreen, and an evening moisturizer that maintains your skin's hydration at night. And they give you an instruction card that explains the best way to use it all, the amount, the order. Basically, it's pretty easy to do, even if you're not familiar with using stuff like this. Helped us filthy historians out a lot, that's for sure. With over 5,000 5-star reviews from around the world, it seems Tiege Hanley is catching on, and if you want to try it for yourself, go to tiege.com, where getting amazing skin is just the start of what they can offer. You can even get a Tiege membership for a 20% discount, the ability to customize your packages, and partake in monthly deals, with free US shipping and low costs for international. Even better, use our link in the description to get 30% off your first box and a free gift. Go see how everything's better with healthy skin. For centuries, the hilly mountain ranges of Anatolia had been the breeding grounds of major civilizations, and an integral part of many major empires from world history, like the Hittites, Lydians, Achaemenids, and Alexander the Great's Macedonian Empire. From the 2nd century BC to the 11th century AD, Anatolia, with its rich natural resources and major urban centers, came under the domination of the Roman Empire and later its medieval Byzantine successor. Over the centuries, the peninsula also served as a natural fortress for the Romans in their wars against the Sassanids and the various Islamic caliphates of the Middle Ages. However, the Roman hold on Anatolia would decline in the aftermath of the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, which would see the great Seljuks under their leader Alparslan conquer most of the peninsula in a swift military campaign. What followed was a great migration of Turkic peoples into Anatolia, thus forever intertwining the histories of these people with the lands in which they now settled. Within a century after Manzikert, the great Seljuk Empire would crumble from within after years of decentralization and mismanagement. In Anatolia, a new rump state, the Sultanate of Rum, would continue to carry the Seljuk legacy in the region, with its rulers styling themselves the successors of the once powerful Seljuk Empire. During the course of the 12th century, the Sultanate of Rum would find itself at the forefront of European Crusader armies, and a resurgent Byzantine Empire under the Komneni dynasty, which would result in the Sultanate losing its military and political influence within the western regions of the Anatolian Peninsula. However, with the Latin Knights crippling their ostensible Byzantine allies at the sack of Constantinople in 1204, and a new Mongol threat to the east preoccupying the many Islamic states of the Iranian plateau, the Sultanate of Rum was afforded a period of peace from its hostile neighbors. During the reign of Kekubad I, the Sultanate of Rum would go through a military and architectural golden age of its own, which would see the state transform into a regional power at the crossroads between Europe and Asia. It is during this period that the Ottoman story would begin. Before we go into the origins of the Ottoman Empire, it's important to remember that many of the events regarding the foundation of the state are shrouded in mystery, owing to the fact that only a handful of major primary sources were written about the Ottomans during this era, and the fact that the Ottomans did not start to record their own history up until the 15th century. Consequently, many modern-day historians are conflicted by the series of events that led up to the foundation of the Ottoman state. so we will instead relay the story as it is traditionally told. During the early decades of the 13th century, many nomadic Turkic tribes from Central Asia and Iran fled their ancestral homes in the wake of Genghis Khan's invasion of these regions. One of these fleeing tribes would be the Kayis, the direct predecessors to the Ottomans. Originally from modern-day Turkmenistan, the Kayi tribe would be attributed by 11th century Turkic historian Mahmud al-Kashgari as being one of the original 22 tribes to come out of the lineage of Oghuz Khan, the legendary and mythical founder of the Turkic peoples of Central Asia. Later Ottoman genealogy from the 15th to 16th centuries would cite that the Ottoman dynasty had direct blood connections with the mythical warlord as a way to gather imperial legitimacy within the Turkic-speaking world. However, evidence of this direct blood connection is met with skepticism by modern-day historians. Whatever the case, during the 1220s, the Kayis, along with many other Turkic tribes, began their migrations west towards Anatolia. During this exodus, the leader of the Kayis, Suleiman Shah, would drown in the Euphrates River in northern Syria in 1227, thus leaving the tribe to his son, Urtural Gazi. Before the closure of the decade, Urtural would successfully lead his people into Anatolia and enroll himself and the Kayi tribe in the service of Seljuk Sultan Kekubad I. During this period, the Sultan of the Seljuks ruled his realm through various Turkish governors and dozens of separate semi-autonomous chieftains, whose leaders were known as Uch-Bey, a title similar to the Western European Margrave. These chiefdoms around the Sultanate would supply the state with warriors, called Ghazis, who were Muslim soldiers who prioritized fighting and plundering in non-Muslim lands in order to gain religious glory and fiscal wealth for themselves. Subsequently, Urtural and his followers too would become Ghazi warriors under the Rum umbrella. In order to establish his loyalty to the state, Urtural Gazi, along with his 400 Ghazi warriors, would fight alongside the Seljuks during the Battle of Yassi-Chemen against an exiled Khwarezmian Shah. The pursuing battle would end in a decisive Seljuk victory, which would see the Khwarezmians being pushed out of Seljuk territories. For their services on the battlefield, Kekubad would gift the Kayi tribe a plot of land at Karaca Mountain, near modern-day Diyarbakir, before permanently settling the tribe near Ankara, placing them near the western frontiers of the Sultanate. Now that they had established a home base for themselves, the Kayis would spend the next couple of decades conducting small raids into the neighbouring empire of Nicaea, joining the ranks of other Ghazi warbands and Turkic clans in the process. It was during these raids that Urtural Gazi would seize the village of Suyut for the Sultanate in 1231. Once again, for his military services, Urtural Gazi would be gifted the villages of Suyut and Domanic by the Sultan, achieving the rank of Uch-Bey. The golden age of the Sultanate of Rum would end alongside the death of Kekubad I, as the Mongol armies of Ugadei Khan, Genghis Khan's son and successor, were now at the doorstep of Anatolia. The newly crowned Kekosra II, lacking the martial and diplomatic talents of his late father, began his reign by openly refusing to submit to Mongol suzerainty. The new Seljuk Sultan would instead form a Muslim-Christian coalition against the Mongols in 1243, but in the ensuing Battle of Kuseda, the Mongols would decimate the coalition, thus ending any major resistance to their hegemony in Anatolia. Consequently, most of the Sultanate of Rum would be annexed, with Kekosra II becoming a puppet ruler to the Mongols. For the rest of the century, the Seljuk Sultan's authority slowly deteriorated, as governors and chiefdoms around the Sultanate started acting more and more independently. As the Sultanate of Rum was going into full decline, the Kayi tribe was slowly settling down in Suyut, putting aside their nomadic lifestyle for a more urban one. Being located on the western frontiers of the Sultanate of Rum, the Kayis were able to avoid direct Mongol military presence, which resulted in the tribe being a haven for Turks fleeing from the Mongols in eastern and central Anatolia. After almost 5 decades since arriving in Anatolia, Urtural Gazi would die from natural causes in 1280. His son, Osman I, would take control of the Kayis in the wake of his death. By the time of Osman, the Byzantine Empire had retaken Constantinople from the Latins, and the Mongol Empire had been divided into 4 separate states. However, the Sultanate of Rum continued to be a puppet state to the Mongol successor state of the Ilkhanate. Due to its physical location, the Kai tribe during this time period had ongoing relations with the various semi-autonomous Byzantine governors of Bithynia, commonly known as Tekfurs. For one reason or another, during the beginnings of the 1280s, tensions between the Byzantine Tekfur of Inegöl and Osman Gazi would erupt into a full-on war, which would see the latter defeating the former in a small skirmish near the village of Hamza Bey. In the wake of their triumph, the Kais would then capture their first fortified castle at Kalaçahisar in 1285 during a surprise night raid, which would give Osman Gazi a base of operations to conduct future campaigns into Byzantine lands. In 1288, the Tekfurs of Inegöl and Karaçahisar would once again try to prevent Osman Gazi from expanding his reach in the region. However, the ensuing Battle of Ikizce would once again prove disastrous for the Byzantines, allowing Osman to capture the fortified castle of Karaçahisar after a lengthy siege. The next few years would see the Kais slowly encroach on Byzantine cities in Bithynia as raids into the region became more and more frequent. These early successes had earned the Kais a large following, as many Ghazi warbands from Anatolia began to enlist their services to Osman in order to participate in their lucrative raids. Now that he'd acquired a steady influx of Ghazi warriors, Osman Gazi would also strive to get the support of the Sufi Hanafi religious lodges in the region as a way to shore up his political influence among the Muslim population. In an attempt to secure an alliance with the Ahis religious order, Osman Gazi would marry the daughter of its leader, Sheikh Edebali, who was also his dear friend and mentor. According to later Ottoman chronicles, one night when Osman stayed over at the home of Edebali, he witnessed a dream in which a large tree sprouted from the earth, covering the entire sky with its leaves and branches. The following morning, when Osman discussed his vision with Sheikh Edebali, the Islamic preacher told him that it symbolized that God had ordained him and his successors to one day rule a worldly empire stretching around the earth. Osman's dream would become in later centuries a major foundational origin story for the imperial house of the Ottoman Empire, and it would serve as a means to justify Ottoman successes in the 15th and 16th centuries as divinely ordained. During the 1290s, the Kai tribe would extend their reach into Byzantine Bithynia, conquering the towns of Bilecik, Terekli, Goynuk, and Eskişehir from local Byzantine Tekfurs. It is important to remember that Osman Gazi's military actions in the region were not simply just a conflict between Muslims and Christians, as many Christians, even former Byzantine Tekfurs like Michael Kossis of Hamankaya, enlisted their services to Osman. As central authority from Constantinople was waning in its Anatolian provinces, more and more Byzantine Tekfurs and Christian soldiers began making individual deals with the up-and-coming Turkic powers in the region. As the Kai tribe grew in terms of territory, central authority within the Sultanate of Rum had become non-existent, as Turkic governors and Uchbeys around Anatolia looked at the puppet Seljuk Sultan in Konya with open disdain. By the end of the century, these Anatolian elites began looking for any opportunities to break their ties with the capital in order to release themselves from Mongol suzerainty. The opportunity would come in 1296, when the Seljuk Sultan was imprisoned by the Mongols due to a failed plot to gain independence for the Sultanate of Rum. Taking advantage of this void in power, many governors and Uchbeys of the Sultanate began to declare their independence across the peninsula in droves. During a Friday prayer in 1299, Osman Gazi too would declare his independence from Konya, ordering that prayers in his name should be read out in the mosques of his domains instead of the Seljuk Sultan. Now birthed as an independent state, the natal Ottoman nation would be the master of its own destiny. For Osman Gazi, the beginning of independence meant the beginning of grander ambitions, and in 1301, he would call for a military campaign to strike deep into Byzantine Bithynia. In a swift military campaign, Ottoman forces were successful in capturing the towns of Köprühisar, Inegöl, and Yenişehir. The town of Yenişehir would be transformed into a capital city, as Osman moved his administration and personal household within its walls. It was also during this period that Muslim families and the families of Ghazi soldiers began to move into the recently conquered urban centres of Bithynia, thus leaving behind their ancestral nomadic roots in the process. Before year's end, Ottoman forces had begun blockading the major Byzantine city of Nicaea, a city that the Sultanate of Rum had lost back during the First Crusade in 1097 and had since regained its status as a regional capital for the Byzantine Empire in Anatolia. After years of neglecting his Anatolian provinces and failing to stop the encroachment of multiple Turkic beyliks into his lands, Osman's blockade of Nicaea was the slap that Byzantine Emperor Andronikos II Palaiologos needed to jump into action. During the summer of 1302, he announced a military campaign to retake the lost Roman lands in Asia Minor. The emperor's son and co-ruler, Michael IX, had launched a military campaign of his own in the region earlier in the year. However, he was met with failure, as his armies were bogged down by Byzantine refugees who were fleeing the peninsula after Osman's military campaigns in the previous year. A 2,000-strong relief force was sent out from Constantinople, led by the Megas Heteriachis Yoios Musilon, to rendezvous with the forces of the local Byzantine tekfurs in the region and lift the blockade of Nicaea. Being dropped off at the coastal town of Yalova, the relief force would proceed to march down south towards the Byzantine city of Prusa, modern-day Bursa, where local Byzantine forces of the region were grouping up. However, being made aware of a sizable Christian army in the region by his scouts, Osman Gazi and his 5,000 men were able to swiftly intercept the Byzantine relief army near the village of Koyunhisar. On the 27th of July 1302, both Ottoman and Byzantine armies made ready for battle on a flat plain near the village. The Byzantine force, under Yoios Musilon, was solely composed of foot infantry, 1,000 of which were recently hired Alan mercenaries from the Balkans. Meanwhile, Osman's forces outnumbered the Byzantines by more than 2 to 1, and were made up of mostly light Turkoman cavalry, many of which were from allied Turkic beyliks from the surrounding regions. The battle would begin when a general charge of Muslim cavalry smashed into the Byzantine line. Almost immediately, Byzantine battle cohesion had fallen apart as the Alan mercenaries under Yoios Musilon began prematurely withdrawing from the battle, leaving the regular Byzantine foot infantry at the mercy of the Turks. As a result of the cavalry charge, the Byzantines' lines of defense were decisively broken, forcing the remnants of the Byzantine relief force to withdraw up north towards Nicomedia. The engagement that would later be known as the Battle of Bapheus would be the first major victory in the history of the newly established Ottoman state. During the aftermath of the battle, Ottoman forces began spreading out in the countryside of Bithynia, raiding and capturing settlements as they went, even managing to capture the coastal city of Gemlik. A year after the battle, the Byzantine tekfurs of Prusa, Kite, Adronos, Kestel and Ulubat would begin a military campaign against the Ottomans as a last-ditch attempt to repulse the forces of Osman Gazi and re-establish Byzantine authority in the local region. Upon gathering up their forces, the Byzantine governors decided to strike at the Ottoman capital city of Yenishehir and then proceed to relieve the city of Nicaea, which was still under an Ottoman blockade. Upon hearing the news of an impending Byzantine counterattack into his newly conquered territories, Osman Gazi quickly mustered a 5,000-strong army and met the Byzantine forces at a nearby mountain pass at Dimbos near Yenishehir. Sources state that the Byzantine army was slightly larger than the Ottoman host, 6,000 to 5,000, but since both armies were forced to fight in a narrow ravine, the Byzantines were unable to take advantage of their numbers to flank their foe. The engagement, that would later be known as the Battle of Dimbos, was a bloody affair for both sides, with the Byzantine tekfur of Kestel and Osman Gazi's nephew, Aydodu Bey, being among the casualties. Eventually, the ferocity of the Ottoman troops under Osman and his son Orhan eventually pushed back the Byzantine army, thus resulting in the Battle of Dimbos being a Pyrrhic Ottoman victory. After the battle, the Byzantine tekfurs and their forces broke off from one another and fled back to their individual holdings to the west, hoping to defend their territories from the wrath of Osman. However, in the months after the battle, Ottoman forces under Osman and Orhan would quickly besiege and capture the towns of Kite, Kestel and Ulubat one by one, further lessening Byzantine presence in Bithynia. Ottoman forces in the region would once again resume their blockade of Nicaea, and also begin to blockade the city of Prusa. Thanks again to Tiege Hanley for sponsoring this video. Get your first box of men's skincare products with a 30% discount by using our link in the description. With Osman Gazi securing victories in the battles of Bapheus and Dimbos, the gates of Byzantine Bithynia were now opened to the newly formed Ottoman beylik and for its Gazi warriors and migrating Muslim families. In the next episode, we'll look at the intrigues of Ottoman-Byzantine relations of the next few decades, and how the beylik under Osman's successors would establish an Ottoman foothold in Europe. Make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps us immensely. Our videos would be impossible to produce without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links down in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.